Hello and welcome everyone to Bow Live, Brokers, Opens, and Tours Worldwide. And we're here today with John Ioannou from Florida Closing and Escrow, your number one title company with a 5-star rating with the Better Business Bureau. We have many languages. We're mobile, digital, wireless, and remote. We'll conduct closings in our office or any locations needed, and remote, and for clients in-state, out-of-state, out-of-country, and as needed. We also help you to structure deals to close, and we're here to answer all your questions with our expert legal attorneys, real estate attorneys. So today, our subject is mastery of the new as-is contract, which is coming out November 1st. John is going to go over the main points, and if you have questions and or would like a presentation in your office or more information, kindly contact us. 1-800-FL-CLOSE, floridaclosing.com, and bowlive.net. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Cindy, and hello, everyone. It's good to be with you today. As Cindy just mentioned, there is a new contract coming out November 1st, which is Monday, with revisions to the as-is contract and the regular contract. So I've presented a presentation. We can go over it today. And then if you have any questions, feel free to email me or Cindy directly. So we're going to go to the presentation now. And this is basically the discussion of the Florida Realtors Florida Bar 2021 residential real estate contracts. This is me, John Ioannou, and this is our company information, Florida Closing and Escrow. We're located in Sunny Isles Beach. We're actually the only title company in Sunny Isles Beach. So if you need us, please feel free to reach out to us. So as we mentioned, this form is going to be available November 1st. If you all use Form Simplicity or any type of program, it'll probably be updated. It's going to show on the bottom of the contracts, it's going to say version 6, and it's going to say the revised date of October 2021. So that's how you're going to know you're using the most up-to-date version. Today we're going to talk about the as-is contract and the residential contract. There are revisions to the riders, and they added some new riders, but we're going to maybe go over that at another time. If you do have questions, as I mentioned, here is my email, ji@floridaclosing.com. Okay, so basically what's new, the revisions have been made to the residential contracts only, the as-is and the regular residential contract. It does not apply to commercial contracts, vacant land contracts. All the other contracts stay the same. Just the as-is residential and regular residential contracts have been revised. They've also revised several riders. The HOA rider has been revised. The FHA rider, right to inspect, pre and post-closing occupancy riders have been amended. Sale of buyer's property and also the backup contract rider has been revised. And they've added new riders as well. There's one for the mold addendum, but that's only for the regular contract. It does not apply to the as-is contract. And they've added a rider for seasonal and vacation rental issues, and that's pretty popular down here in South Florida, so that's actually a good one. And then they've added a rider regarding the PACE disclosure. So basically, to summarize, obviously we can go in depth, and if you do want to schedule one with your office, let Cindy know. We can talk for about an hour, but today we're going to keep it brief. I'm just going to give you a summary of the changes. Basically, there's 10 main revisions. The first one is they've revised the definition of personal property, and we're going to see that on the next slide, what that change is. Definition of what a closing date and time is. The CFPB extension process. This is a big one because some people thought that there was an automatic 10-day extension. That's no longer the case. Number 4 is going to talk about assignability. Number 5 is the big one, financing. They did a lot of changes to the financing section of the contract, so we're going to go over that. They also made some changes to the closing costs, fees, and charges. 7 is also a big change regarding time. We'll go over that. And of course, as you can expect, they revised the force majeure section to include pandemics and things like that. Fencing, reporting, that's more for us as a title company. And number 10 is also a major change, a revision regarding notice and delivery. We're going to go through that also today. So the first change, the first major change is the personal property section. This is obviously on the top of the first page. They've deleted intercom. That's kind of an older system. No one uses that anymore. They've added thermostat because now some homes have these updated thermostats, digital thermostats that are quite expensive. So that's been added. Doorbells has been added, which includes the Ring system and similar systems like that, because those can also be expensive. This is in addition here, the television wall mounts and television mounting hardware. Sometimes people would take their TVs and things out, but also would take all the wall mounts and would leave these big holes and whatnot in the wall. So now these are to be left behind, because if the buyer comes in with their own TV, they can just stick it on the wall mounts and not have to worry about that. So this is another change. Also, it's been issues in the past. They've added mailbox keys, which is an important addition here, and storm protection items and hardware as well, just not the storm shutters, the screws, and anything that need to attach the storm shutters to the walls or windows. So those are the revisions to the personal property section. Next, we're going to talk about the closing date. This is actually quite important. It's because it's been an issue in the past and they've kind of clarified it, so it's good to go over it now. So basically, the closing date is the closing of this transaction shall occur when all funds required for closing are received by the closing agent and collected, and the closing documents have been received and delivered. So what that means is, in the past, people would say, I'm not going to give you the keys because the seller has not received their funds. So that's no longer the case. The closing has occurred and the keys can be released when the title company receives all the funds and receives all the closing documents. Now, why this is important is because as a title company, we would receive the funds. The closing would happen after hours, let's say on a Friday, maybe 5 or 6 o'clock. We're not able to send out the money to the seller until the next business day. So sellers would say, hey, look, if I don't have the money, I'm not giving you the keys. So that's been amended and clarified. So now, as a seller's realtor or seller, as long as a title company, we can confirm we have all the funds and all the documents, the keys can be released. So that's a nice change to clarify that issue. Next, the extension of closing dates. So there was this issue of, without this added blue part, there was a question of, okay, so if the loan is not ready, does the buyer have an additional 10 days to get loan approval? That has been clarified to mean that, and here's the blue section that's added, if paragraph 8B, which is the financing contingency part of the contract, is checked and loan approval has been obtained and lender's underwriting is complete, then if the closing has not occurred because of the CFPB requirements, which is basically the notice requirements, which is that 3-day notice that the lender has to give to the buyer, and the buyer has 3 days to approve. Then instead of 10, now they've reduced it to 7, just in case the CD is delivered on a Friday. They've added some days for the weekend. So the important part here is the loan has to be approved and all the lender underwriting requirements have been completed. See, in the previous contract, this was not in there. So people were saying, okay, look, we're not ready yet. The lender's not ready. We need 10 days. So now this has been clarified, which is good. And only a 7-day extension can be given if the loan has been approved. So this is actually another good revision that they did. Number 6, okay, occupancy and possession. They basically added to 6B seasonal and short-term vacation rentals. So they've added those here as well. And on the bottom, the good part is actually they say, okay, estoppels are needed for regular leases, but tenant estoppels are not needed for these short-term seasonal or vacation rentals. And then paragraph 7, they've added this red section. Before, this was not here. So even though it says check 1, some realtors would forget to check it off. So in case something is not checked out of the 3 boxes, then it defaults to the 3rd box, which says buyer may not assign this contract. So what I recommend all our realtors to do is to check off this first box here on this line. This is line 78, but you can't see it here. Line 78 of the contract, which says may assign but not be released. This is good in case the buyer maybe wants to buy it under an LLC or a corporation or a trust. If you have this box checked, we as a title company can prepare an assignment of contract where just the buyer needs to sign and we don't need the seller's signature on it. So I recommend checking that box. If you don't check off the box, then it defaults to the may not assign part, which still does mean that the buyer may be able to assign, but the seller has to agree to it. So if the seller does not agree to sign an assignment, then the buyer cannot assign it. They'd have to wait till after closing, where we would have to prepare a quitclaim deed, and there's some additional cost to that. So make sure to check off that box. Next. So now we're going to go to the financing contingency part, which is the major issue of the changes for this year's revisions. I'm just going to go over some of the defined terms for what the loan approval period is. So that's the time the buyer has to obtain loan approval, and the default in the contract is 30 days. Lenders are very busy nowadays, so I do highly recommend not leaving that blank and putting 45 days there if you can. Financing, the terms upon which buyer seeks to borrow money, such as the type of loan, interest rates, and the term of loan. Those are the financing terms. Appraisal is the appraisal or an alternative valuation satisfactory to the lender. Lenders know that appraisers are very busy nowadays, so now they are starting to use alternatives to an actual appraisal. So whatever they use, whatever is satisfactory to them, is okay with us. Loan approval means a loan that meets the financing plus appraisal terms. This is the big change. Appraisals must be done during the loan approval period, which is either this 30 or 45 days. There's no longer an out for getting an appraisal after the financing contingency period. So this now puts the onus on the borrower to make sure they tell their lender that in Florida, we need to have loan approval and appraisal back during the loan approval period. If they don't get it and the loan is denied because of the appraisal and it has passed the financing contingency period, the buyer is at risk of being in a default and losing their deposit. Some notes: the buyer has the obligation to proceed in good faith in obtaining the loan, including paying for the appraisal, and buyer's obligation to respond to written requests for information. So the buyer does have the obligation to move forward. No buyer's obligation to provide a written notice prior to end of the loan approval period of intent to proceed with or cancel the contract. So whether the buyer gets loan approval or does not get loan approval, The buyer must give notice during this loan approval period of either moving forward without the financing contingency or asking for an extension. And then they talk about property-related conditions no longer includes appraisal. So that's the important part. The appraisal must be done during the financing loan approval period. Okay, so here's the actual section that has the revisions to it. This is paragraph 8 of the contract. You actually see on paragraph 8A, this looks a lot smaller and shorter than the previous version. They've deleted all the other stuff, and basically it says here, this is a cash transaction with no financing contingency. The buyer can still get financing, but there's no financing contingency. Here's the loan approval period definition. Obtaining a loan during this time for the so-and-so, you should check off all these boxes when filling it out. Financing and the appraisal is here. So basically, paragraph 8B1 talks about the loan approval. The definition of loan approval is when paragraph 8B1 is checked, so that's here. Obtaining the loan approval, and 2, which includes the appraisal. So basically what all of this means is they need to get loan approval with the appraisal back all before the financing contingency period ends if you leave it blank 30 days. So that's basically the main issue. The appraisal is included here, so please remember that. That's the big thing. Next. This is also a continuation of this paragraph 8 of the financing part. It talks about giving written notice to the seller that the buyer either has obtained loan approval and has received the appraisal back, or if they don't, providing written termination of the contract. Note that if the buyer does not give written notice to the seller, then the seller has 3 days after that termination that the seller can determine to cancel the contract. So this is a very important section. We can dive into it more at another time, but just know that the buyer must give notice to the seller whether they've obtained approval during the loan approval period. Here are the summary of changes for the closing costs section. They've added charges for FIRPTA in case there is FIRPTA involved. To specify that buyers shall designate the closing agent for Miami-Dade or Broward Regional provision in paragraph 9C. There were 3 sections there, right? The first one, the seller pays, and it says the seller shall designate the closing agent. Line 162 says that the buyer shall designate the closing agent and pay for the closing costs. But line 164 never said who chooses the title company. So they clarified that, and they put language in there that says buyer shall designate the closing agent. Number 3, updated the time for buyer to obtain a survey, which is now 5 days prior to the closing date. And they also provided an obligation for the seller to pay in full any public body assessments allowed to be prepaid. So those are those changes. The standards section, this is paragraph 18 of the contract. This lists all of the additional standards. These are really important. You should definitely read them. The main one that they revised is regarding paragraph F, which talks about time. It used to be basically that it's still calendar days, but if a time period ended on a Saturday or Sunday, it would go to the next business day. They've deleted that. It's no longer the next business day, it's the next calendar day. So there was that requirement of the next business day, which ended at 5 p.m. That's been deleted. So now the calendar day is the full day, which ends at 11:59 p.m. So that was one of the changes they made. Also, this was an important one as well. The time is calculated based on where the property is. So sometimes us in Florida, there was a time that ended at, let's say, 12 midnight, but the buyers were in California. So it's still, 9 o'clock there. So that's been clarified to where the property is located is what time you use. List of federal holidays is here if you want to look that up, and just be aware of those. Of course, standard G talks about force majeure, and they've added civil unrest, governmental actions and mandates, government shutdowns, epidemics, and pandemics. So now all of these are included in force majeure. So if another shutdown happens, or God forbid another pandemic happens, and things are shut down, the contracts will be put on hold until that force majeure issue has been resolved. So next, the fencing requirements, that's just mainly more for us. And here is the revision to the notice and delivery. All notices to be made in writing must be made by mail, fax, personal delivery, and email. They've added email to clarify that. As I've mentioned before to the realtors who know me, text messages sent through social media do not count for written notices. So if there's anything you want to tell the buyer, seller, other realtor, put it in an email. Do not put it in a text message. Text messages are not valid for any type of agreement between the parties. So be aware, email only, no text messages. Okay, so those were the changes to the as-is contract. Those changes are the exact changes to the residential contract. However, for the residential regular contract, they've added 2 more additional changes. So those 2 changes are in the property inspection and repair section. They've added information about watercraft lifts. And then also where the seller is obligated to make general repairs, seller can make those repairs without getting an estimate. So the regular contract is the exact same changes we just talked about with the addition of these 2 changes. And so that's it. So those are the changes. Those are the major changes. As Cindy mentioned, we'd be happy to come by your office and maybe explain more in detail, hand out the forms, go over them a little bit more. Just contact Cindy, and either myself or Anthony Bowser, the other attorney in our office, will be happy to stop by and answer any questions and explain to you exactly more in detail of the changes to the new as-is and regular residential contracts coming out on Monday, November 1st.
And I do want to mention one of the benefits of working with Florida Closing and Escrow is that John or Anthony, our legal real estate experts, will review the contract for you at no additional fee. And they will also do addendums at no extra charge, etc., and help you structure deals to close. So we hope to assist you, and we look forward to hearing from you and to much success ahead. FloridaClosing.com, 1-800-FL-CLOSE. If you need the attorneys, you can reach John at 954-821-4166 and Anthony Bauza, 305-720-2844. And you can reach me at 786-457-6832. And I can also help promote you and your listings with bowlive.net, live broadcast simulcast. And you do get a playback link as well and targeted promotions. So thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you, John.